Welcome to River of Suck Podcast, episode 26. Today we are live from Fiddle Hell Online. And our special guest today is Melissa Tong, zooming in from Brooklyn, New York. Thanks for joining us, Melissa. How's it going?
Shout out to Brooklyn. What? Happy 26th anniversary, Andy. It's a huge accomplishment.
26th anniversary of my first episode.
I love it.
Not a little baby podcast anymore. Well, so this is, of course, part of a live event. And as such, we do have Capo the cat off in the corner here. And we have a minimal live studio audience here. On the floor, you can see Joy's hat. And we have people joining us from Fiddle Hell. So welcome, everyone, to the conversation.
I'm a huge fan of both Capo and Joy's hat.
That's right. So we have a lot of fun things to talk about, like mostly our feelings and how do we survive the world. My favorite Victor Wooten quote, "You should be the youest you that you can be. You're stuck being you. You will never be anybody else." So who is Melissa Tong? What makes you feel like the youest you? The most Melissa of Melissa, that is the youest you. Let's start there. What makes you feel the youest you, Melissa?
Oh, that's such a good starting point. I had so many conversations with so many people during the initial shutdown of, I work with a wonderful conductor named Rick Benjamin, and he calls it the great unpleasantness. So in the beginning of the great unpleasantness, like many people, I started spiraling deep, down. And I found that it was really important for myself and for everyone with whom I was connecting on Zoom that we find those things that make us feel like ourselves. And for me, it was definitely playing music, connecting with friends, doing yoga, spending time with the kitties, talking to family, connecting with loved ones, all of the cliches that it's easy to say, but I think we really started actually feeling it whenever the great unpleasantness started 37 years ago.
Right on. 37 years ago. Oh, all right. So the River of Suck is an analogy, right? It's from John McGann, who's one of my heroes. The River of Suck is an imaginary river that runs through your mind. You are on your comfort shore. Behind you is your comfort cave. That's where you do all the things that you already know how to do. Comfort zone, stuff that's easy. On the other side of the River of Suck are future versions of you who can do the things that you wish you could do now. Whatever your goals are, they seem impossible. They seem super far away. They seem like you'll never get there. The problem is, in between you and your goals is the raging whitewater rapids of the River of Suck. The raging whitewater rapids, rocks, and most importantly and most challengingly and swimmingly, the thought piranhas.
Oh no!
Which are those negative thoughts that just kind of appear in your brain and try to sabotage your good vibes as you're trying to just be you and get better and accomplish your goals. So the point is, you have to suffer along the path. It is not just like a magical jump. So I think about strategies to cross that river as like little rafts. So even though it seems impossible, there are ways to get there, like daily things that you do, whatever. So I'm curious as we continue our conversation about how you feel the River of Suck plays into your life and your music.
Oh, boy, you ask all the easy questions, Andy.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking a lot about the journey of progress and improvement for a practicing workshop that I gave at the wonderful Fiddle Hell Festival a few days ago, actually. And for me, I actually likened it to I took a trip to Machu Picchu. I really traveled around Peru for a month to celebrate my 40th birthday. And part of that was a 5-day trek to Machu Picchu. And planning a trek like that, I think I'm sorry that it's back on land, not in the river, but I think it's also applicable that we have an arrival point, right? And so we show up just as like everyday people, I'm going to go to Machu Picchu. I don't know why I had this idea. I'm going to end up there. And you have no idea how you're going to get there. And then it's the guide who takes your hand and shows you the plan and says, okay, you have to trust that by day 5, we're going to arrive at Machu Picchu. But then that means that you have an arrival point for day 4, an arrival point for day 3, an arrival point for day 2, an arrival point at the end of day 1. And then while you're at your starting point, what is the action that you are going to take immediately in this moment? So if you are envisioning yourself accomplishing whatever you want to accomplish on the other side of the river, and you have these rafts, not that there's anything wrong with just kind of like aimlessly wandering the river either. I think a lot can be gained from that experience as well, but it helps to plan ahead a little bit and be like, okay, well, that raft is right there. So what are the rafts that I need to get to in order to reach that other raft right before I can reach the other side? And that can be a very exciting journey with a lot of detours along the way as well.
Right on. I love that. The 5-day journey with specific points along the way. It's easy to talk about this, and like it's harder to remember it when you're in the moment of the most stress and the most anxiousness about not being where you want to be today.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why we talk about it. The best thing about this podcast is not that I have all of my emotions on lockdown. In fact, it's the total opposite. And the more I talk about it, the more I understand it. So that's why I'm still here, 26 episodes later. And it sort of comes down to fear and feeling your feelings, which is something I didn't understand at the beginning of this process. I thought I was just fighting your thought piranhas and getting better. But really, it sort of just comes down to feeling your feelings and acknowledging them and giving them some space to exist while you're trying to do these impossible things. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's why so many people resonate with the River of Suck. It's a familiar place to be, no matter what you're trying to accomplish. And the human experience is universal. I'm going to try not to sound all like, hoodoo, whatever, ethereal. But I think it's true. I think it's absolutely true. And I think that's why it resonates with people. And that's why in the moment, if you can connect with your breath, it is the one thing. Yeah, I'm looking at all of these little squares, and I think at least half of us just paused and filled up our lungs. I've been living with anxiety pretty much for as long as I can remember. I mean, I remember specific moments when when my anxiety level was nearly through the roof, and I didn't really know what a panic attack, like the most severe panic attack, was, until I had an experience where I sent a text to all of my friends who sort of lived in the neighborhood. I was living in Manhattan at the time. And I kind of sent out an SOS and I said, I think I'm having a panic attack. And immediately one of my friends called me and she just talked me through my breath. She just said, breathe with me. And even though I felt like in that moment I couldn't actually catch my breath, it was helpful to hear a reassuring voice of someone who loved me very much, and to literally have her coach me on how to inhale in that moment when all of the alarm bells were going off. It felt like the entire world was about to come crashing on me. And that's the interesting thing about our nervous systems, is that in that moment, I was not in any real danger. But my fight or flight, my nervous system definitely thought that there was a bear, like, 7 inches behind me, like about to take a swipe at my eyeballs.
Yeah.
My body was convinced of that in that moment.
Well, leaning on your community is such an important thing. And that's why the analogy extends to the swim team, of course, because we're not in this alone. We are all in this together with our weird human brains that sometimes work for us and sometimes work against us. So, we can't solve all of the world's problems with these ideas, but we can acknowledge them and hopefully with our community, find a way, some kind of path to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's hear, where did you come from and how did you become the Melissa Tong that we see today? And
I feel like I'm about to give a speech like that kid gives in Goonies when he's like, and then in the 4th grade, so stop me if you're like, okay, not that much detail, actually.
Whatever you want. We're listening.
Well, I was born in upstate New York, proud daughter of 2 immigrants. My father's from Hong Kong. My mother's from Taiwan. Their common language is English. And so we spoke English at home. So growing up upstate New York, there were not I'm Chinese. I just remembered that this is an audio podcast. So I look Chinese, and so growing up in upstate New York, I used to get made fun of for those things that kids make fun of other kids for. And I also attended Chinese school, but I also didn't, and this was just on the weekends, but I also didn't fit in at Chinese school because most of the children who attended Chinese school already spoke Chinese at home, and we spoke English at home because my parents speak 2 different dialects. So I kind of just didn't really fit in anywhere ever. And on top of that, I started attending, I was getting pulled out of my class starting in kindergarten to go to other classes. And so they would actually send one of those mini buses for me when I was in elementary school to take me up to the junior high and then subsequently up to the high school to take math class. And I would sit at these, high school student-sized desks, being a tiny, I'm not a large person now, but I was an even tinier, like 7-year-old, 10-year-old. And so I would sit at these desks taking these math classes with the lunchbox under my feet. I'm sure some of them thought it was cute. A lot of people made fun of me. Bottom line being that I kind of just got made fun of most of my childhood for one thing or another. And I played piano and I played violin. And so I, kind of stuck out for those reasons because it was not necessarily the popular thing to do in the school in which I was at the time. And so I think I learned my defense mechanism, my survival mechanism at that point was to make fun of myself, to try to diminish myself, to minimize my achievements. I mean, even now, see, I can't, I'm 43 years old and I'm still hesitant to be like, okay, I was achieving things, and that's hard. It's really, really hard. So yeah, then fast forward, I moved to Utah. I moved to Salt Lake City in high school and I decided to reinvent myself. I pretended like I had been popular. I even invented a boyfriend.
A fresh start.
Yeah. So word to any of my friends from Salt Lake City that might be listening to this, that boyfriend was never real.
Oops.
But luckily for me, Salt Lake, the culture in that school was completely different. They actually very highly valued academic achievement and achievement in the arts. And I think that move, and it's funny, believe it or not, I actually fit in better in Salt Lake City, Utah, as a Chinese daughter of 2 immigrants. I'm not Mormon, but I fit in better in Salt Lake City than I ever had before that. And found my people. I was active with the orchestra, and the musicians were the popular ones at school. It was very disorienting. Yeah. So then that takes us to college. And like I said, I was sort of an anxious person my whole life anyway. And then I got to college and I started as a violin performance and recording engineering double major. And then I ended up dropping the engineering degree because one of the prereqs was getting up in the morning to go to class, which, as a musician is challenging. I think they do that purposely. Like recording engineering 101 is Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 a.m. And, attendance based. Yeah. You're all shaking your heads. Thank you. That's where I was. And so I was about to fail out of that class specifically because I never showed up. Anyway, so I was a violin performance major. And it was sort of a miserable experience. And I almost quit. And it was a very dark time of my life. I was like 17, ill-equipped to deal with some of those pressures. And yeah, it was bad. And then I switched studios and started studying with a teacher who was just more suited for where I was at the time. And I started having panic attacks early on during my experience in college as well. My senior year of college, I got a new instrument where I think it was probably just not set up in a suitable way for my fragile frame or something. And I went to a summer festival where I was playing, 8 to 10 hours a day, completely injured myself and almost had to quit. And so that was, 20 years ago. And over the past 20 years, I've been on and off dealing with performance anxiety issues, repetitive strain issues, and of course, one just feeds into the other. And the last probably 10 years or so, I've been playing basically without pain and injury. And I still have a lot of anxiety, but I sort of like look at anxiety as my companion now.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, part of the issue for me when I was a child was that people treated fear and anxiety and nerves as if it was something bad.
Right.
They would just be like, don't be nervous. Why are you nervous? And then it would make me feel smaller and worse that, oh, there's something wrong with me because I'm nervous.
Right.
And so now I just talk to my anxiety. I'm like, oh, my old friend, here you are again. And in a lot of ways, I think it's what drove me. It's what kept me working. It's what kept me striving. It's what I always try to be the most prepared person in the room because I am so anxious that if I'm not, everything's going to fall apart and I will never work again. But it's like fear is the best motivator. How many people have said that?
You may have stumbled upon the meaning of life, though, because in being in conversation with those negative feelings, you're acknowledging them and you're giving them space to exist because they are part of you. And when you're not pushing them away, that's, I think, when the biggest leaps are actually possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Olympians, adrenaline works in their favor, and obviously not all the time, but it's about harnessing that energy and allowing it to allow you to support you to go farther than you think you can. And also with the preparation thing, it also comes with experience. Just even over the past few days preparing for the workshops for Fiddle Hell. I'm still anxious doing them. I'm still anxious here. I'm anxious right now. Hey, y'all, I'm anxious. And I think leaning on your preparation, I actually attended a wonderful webinar with the sports psychologist, Don Green. Write down that name if you don't already know him. Don Green, Greene. He works with Olympians. He works with hostage negotiators. He used to be, I meant to look this up. I don't remember if he's still on faculty at Juilliard. I don't think he is anymore. He probably still does guest lectures, but he was on faculty at Juilliard for a long time. So he works with very high achieving human beings on peak performance. And one thing that he talks about is flow. And it's where you want to make sure that challenge and ability are meeting one another. If you have too much, and I've actually heard this described another way, if you think of it as a graph where one axis is the level of challenge, another axis is your ability. And it's about finding the right balance of those two things for yourself, and then figuring out how much are you willing to go out of your comfort zone, where is the growth going to happen for yourself. Is that 1% out of your comfort zone, 10%? Some people live 80% out of their comfort zone. They're just like always chasing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's about your risk profile, right? If you have a financial advisor, they want to know your risk profile so that you can grow and develop your nest egg, your abilities, your toolkit, all of those things. I worked with a wonderful organization a few years ago called Broadway for Arts Education, and they have a whole campaign they call Living in the Orange. And it's how living in the green is your comfort zone. It's your cozy place. It's your old t-shirt. Living in the red is the scary place. And especially when you're working with students, you have to be so cognizant and aware and allow for there to be dialogue and feedback from your students. For all you educators out there, I'm guilty of this more often than I would like to admit. I'm like, this is what we're doing. This is what you're going to do. It's a very top-down approach, but be aware if you're pushing someone too hard, because that's not going to encourage growth. All that does is just like trigger the panic response. And we all know when you hit that place, now as adults, we have many more coping mechanisms, but our children are not equipped with those.
Some of them healthy and some of them not.
Yes.
I love that color thing, the color spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is like having realistic expectations. Like if you set out for impossible goals and then you don't succeed in getting there, and then you beat yourself up for being a failure, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that could have been solved with a more realistic goal, or those stepwise goals like we were talking about in the beginning.
Yes,
and realizing
absolutely.
that the biggest, farthest away, most impossible feeling goal can, in theory, be accomplished with those smaller steps.
Mm-hmm. I want to share one. Andy knows that I'm a big hiker. So one of my favorite stories, I was on a trek in the Himalayas in Nepal, and I ended up growing very close with a wonderful friend named Donna. And Donna also lives in New York, but we met in Nepal, and she has asthma. And our porters, first of all, the Nepali people are just the kindest people in the world. They're unbelievable. And the porters would stay with Donna, and they would be like, 10 more steps, Donna. I mean, the air is thin up there. It is hard for anybody who's been training, let alone someone, living and dealing with that. And
let's get more specific for 1 second. Like at high elevations, there's less oxygen. Your body and your brain needs oxygen to function. So
yes,
it's real.
And
what
when
kind of
you're
elevation?
oxygen deprived,
Yeah,
that's when the panic response can kick in.
Yeah.
at which point you need more oxygen, at which point it's even more challenging. So the porters would be with her and they're like, Donna, 5 more steps, 10 more steps, whatever it is. And I was right next to her and she had her trekking poles and she just like put one foot in front of the other. And she was just, and they call it Nepali flat. Nepali flat is very steep. So the night before, the guide would say, okay, tomorrow is Nepali flat, a little bit up, a little bit down. And so she would be there with her trekking poles. And while the porters are saying 20 more steps, Donna, she would say 1.
Yeah.
Just over and over and over again. And it was so inspiring. And in some cases, we were among the last to arrive and we did not care.
1,000,000 first steps.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful. And she got there. Cool.
She did. She's amazing.
What elevation are we talking about up there?
Ooh, I should know this. If someone wants to Google Annapurna loop, we didn't make it to base camp, but we did just the Annapurna loop. I mean, it's high enough for me.
17,769 feet. That's ridiculously high. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Quite
amazing.
An incredible part of the world. Myself being a Star Wars fan, I was seeing, Star Wars scenes everywhere I looked.
Oh yeah. Oh, was that filmed out there?
No. Maybe. I don't know, but it felt like it.
Yeah. Another planet.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your you have been a Broadway musician, and I wanted to talk about that, but also your journey there. And you have a phrase that I have written down somewhere, becoming an overnight success in 18 short years. Right? I mean,
did I say that?
Really, yeah. I mean, it's so funny because it's so real, Everyone sees the tip of the iceberg where the success moment happens, but
yes.
You're saying it wasn't always easy to get there.
Life is always a bowl of cherries, Andy. What are you talking about? Well, going back to college, I attended college in LA, and I was injured at the time, as I mentioned, and I sort of dabbled with the thought of auditioning for grad school, but injury just made it impossible to perform at the level needed in order to get into grad school. So I was trying to figure out what to do. And at the time, there was a wonderful, wonderful man named Joey Corpus, who was known as the underground guru. He wasn't on faculty anywhere, but he would give lessons to all of the freelancers in New York. I know orchestral players from London who would fly into New York once or twice a year just to take lessons with him every day for like a week. He was just this amazing mechanic. Mechanic makes it sound bad, but he was just able to like look at what you're doing, hear you're playing, and just diagnose and recommend the path for you. And I had taken a couple lessons with him in New York prior to my moving here through mutual friend. And I was trying to figure out what to do. My sister, I have a younger sister who is a beautiful dancer and artist in her own right. And she was dancing in New York at the time, just freelancing and auditioning. And so we decided to move to the city together. She was subletting and thinking about moving to New York, I think, at the time. And so we decided to go for it. And I thought that I had friends from college who had left LA, had gone to Juilliard, had moved to New York, were doing the thing. I thought that I could reach out to them to make connections and to start working. And I reached out to all of them and I got crickets. So that was in October of 2002. And I was just living here, sharing 350 square foot apartment in the East Village that sometimes didn't have heat with my sister. We thought we were going to try it for a year. We literally had 2 twin mattresses on the floor because we didn't think we were going to stay. So we didn't bother buying bed frames. Like it was, the classic stereotypical New York living the dream artist experience.
Yeah.
And I burned through actually before that, I moved to New Jersey and worked at Starbucks for a few months, and I was working at an insurance agency. And frankly, working at Starbucks was one of my favorite jobs I ever had. We had regulars. I loved it, but never have I consumed less coffee than I did when I worked there because I was just so busy all day. And by the time I got home, I smelled like a coffee bean, and the last thing I wanted was coffee. How did we get here? Okay, so back to New York. Sorry.
It's all real.
That's what happens with my brain sometimes. So I'm living in the city, and I burned through my savings, what little I had, basically almost immediately. And I started applying for temp jobs. And even in temp agencies, I mean, I was applying to like be an assistant to the assistant to the assistant. And there was just nothing at that point. And it was winter 2002. So about a year after 9/11. And New York was still kind of reeling and recovering at that point. And I finally landed a temp job at a financial company. And at that point, that was the best thing that could have possibly happened to me. They had catered lunch every day. So I knew I would have lunch. And they ordered so much food that I knew that I could bring leftovers home for dinner for my sister and me. And that is what fed us for months. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I happened to be having a conversation with a good friend from LA, who's now one of the top studio calls out there. And he had gone to Juilliard, and so he still had friends in New York. And I spoke with him spring of 2003. And he's like, "How's it going? How are the gigs?" And I was like, "Mark, I haven't had a single gig.
Not one gig.
Not one gig." And at that point, it was probably March or something, somewhere around there. So I had been here for 5 months, 6 months, and he was shocked, and he was like, "Okay, we have to do something about this. Let me make a call." And so he called a good friend of his who was contracting a little bit in New York, and he said, "Look, just please call my friend. She needs a gig." And he did. He took a chance on me without ever having met me, without having heard me, and gave me my first gig. And that was probably May or June of 2003. And from there, I met people on that gig, and they're like, "Oh, you're new to town. Let me blah, 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 we get your contact information." And so from there, I started playing anything, anyone that would have me.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of moving to New York with no plan sounds so terrifying. And you're talking about, I think, the moment where a lot of people diverge, right? You either quit when it's really hard or you keep going, but you need some kind of kernel of some hope, right? Because like I remember when I moved to Colorado with I thought I would get lots of gigs, right? It's a big bluegrass scene, I'll be fine. But about a year in, I was like, should I move? This is not working. I don't really have enough gig. Like I played some gigs and they weren't very good. They weren't paying a lot of money, and I'm like,
the first year is the
sustainable.
hardest. Yeah, if you can survive that first year, then you can survive anything that life throws at you, even a pandemic.
Yeah, you can survive it if you survive it. So so somehow then fast forward, I guess you were on this musical Ain't Too Proud. Did you ever feel like I think people should know about this, right? They should know that you're a famous Broadway musician. So like, can you talk a little bit about that? And like let's hear like all that suffering. It really did get you somewhere, right? Can we talk about that? The success part?
All that suffering, and all I have to show for it is my wall of instruments behind me. Okay. First of all, Andy, you're way too generous and ego inflating and all of that. For anyone who missed it, Andy and I are actually really good friends. I don't know why I said actually, like it's surprising. We're very good friends. Period. We're very good friends. And this is my first time being interviewed by a very good friend. So it's a new.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not famous. No one cares about me. I was violin 4. Let's get that straight. They added my book because there's a minimum number of musicians that you need at each theater. And someone just wrote in the chat, well, I care. Thank you.
Yeah. Some of us care, Melissa.
I do want to just briefly talk about the show though, because it was a unicorn. It was a Broadway unicorn. Andy and I were joking about whether or not I was like open to sharing my feelings with people. And I said, sometimes my feelings come out of my eyeballs. It just happens. I'm one of those people where like, if I'm playing a wedding gig, I cry. I don't know them. I just like, and I don't even like weddings. I really enjoyed Andy Enjoy's wedding, but but I don't know. That's what happens. And I have this thing where you're not officially a New Yorker. Like you haven't earned your New York stripes until you've done the ugly cry on the subway. I've done that cry so many times. And when I see other people doing the ugly cry on the subway, I understand that all they want to do is to pretend like they're not doing the ugly cry. But also all I want to do is hug them. And also it makes me cry when I see them crying.
Yeah.
So that was a very long story because I've actually already cried today because I'm now prepping so spoiler alert, my show closed in January due to Omicron. We opened March 2019 and then obviously we shut down March 12th, 2020, which happened to be the same day that my first nephew was born. So that was like a really impactful day all around. So March 12th, 2020, all of Broadway was shut down for, we all know what happened. And then we thought we were coming roaring back in October of 2021. And we had been doing really, really well. And then Omicron hit. And we had to shut down the 2 weeks before Christmas. And, it was just too much of a hit to absorb. And so we ended up closing for good January of this year, January 2022, January 16th. And so now I'm thankfully getting asked to play other gigs, and I'm going to start subbing on another show. And the way it works is when you are a sub, you don't get any rehearsals, period. You get a video of the conductor to watch. You get a recording, hopefully where you can hear what's happening with the violins or the strings, that you actually know how to play it. Sometimes you don't. The recording, I've heard recordings where the recording that's available, all you hear is trumpet. And you're like, okay, well, I know how the trumpet part's supposed to go.
Yeah.
And so now I'm prepping to start subbing. And again, I want to be the most prepared person in the room. And I was running the second act of the show today. I had everything set up. Like I had my conductor monitor, I had my in-ears, I had all that stuff. And all of a sudden I'm like, I started doing the visualization thing where I tried to imagine how I'm going to feel at the end of my first show. Because part of the preparation process is I try to get myself to feel anxious so that I'm prepared. because I know I'm going to
Wow.
feel anxious when I'm there.
That
And
is so good.
is it a little meta?
It's so good. It's so brilliant.
And so I like projected, okay, how am I going to feel at this point? There's a passage coming up. I know I'm going to feel tight. And then it came up to toward the end where we're like coming up on the end of the show. The bows are coming up. And now I can feel myself tearing up again. I'm like, how am I going to feel when it comes to the end of the first show? And I just started crying. And I was like, I'm going to be really upset because here I am very high. I'm going to be really upset because this was a very circuitous way of me saying that Ain't Too Proud was the best thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah.
It was just, I mean, the show itself was so beautiful, such an important, timely show, especially where we are as a society today. And the story itself is wonderful. But then from the top down, like the producers, the creative team, the actors, I sound like I'm giving like an acceptance speech, but but really it was just such a uniquely warm, welcoming, talented, all of it. And the band, we became an absolute family. And as a freelancer, as probably many of you know, our gigs are temporary, right? That's the nature of it. And whether you're on tour for 10 months or whatever it is, 10 days, like that becomes your family. And I've toured a lot throughout my years. And I realized that what I had been craving, not having a job, was family, my people, like my community. I have people like Andy, whom I consider to be some of my most precious people in my life, but I never see them. And so to have a group, and plus these people were just sick musicians. I mean, they play with Santana, Vanessa Williams, Janet Jackson, Paul Simon. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on, like heavy hitters in this band. Like I said, I don't know why they let me in. But it was like so inspiring to be around these people all the time and to just like have someone that you're seeing every day and be like, hey, how are you today? You know, oh, I remember your daughter was sick a couple days ago. How's your daughter feeling? Like all the minutia that I think people maybe with office jobs take for granted, I was craving it.
Yeah.
And so not only was it a phenomenal production, it became my family. And so I've been feeling that loss hard.
Getting that experience sounds incredible and amazing. So I hope that whatever comes next for you, you're going to at some point feel that again. You said so many good things just now, and I need to respond to a couple of them. First off, like subbing in a musical is terrifying. And you just made me realize that I had sort of forgotten about or pushed away one of the most terrifying gigs that I've ever done, which was a violin sub on a musical for one show. In a very exposed part on it was a Sondheim musical, and I was it was like a violin and a viola. I got no rehearsal, and I was so scared, and like hearing you talk about that made me relive how scared I was.
I'm so sorry, but actually I want to hear more about that gig. Maybe without mentioning specifics, if it's going to get you in trouble.
No, I don't think I'll be in trouble. It was actually the year that I lived in Salt Lake City, and it wasn't a very large production, but I think just the idea that you could be exposed for being a fraud, that you don't belong there, because like I'm not a really practiced Broadway musical style musician, so to jump in and play that part with no rehearsal was just so scary on a very exposed violin part where there was nothing, the cues for me to do the things like you can't blend in, right?
Right.
You're really like out on the precipice.
Yes.
So I felt that so much. And from a fear standpoint, it wasn't a very healthy gig for me. But a lot of people on this podcast recently, especially, have been talking about being prepared for the things that you're doing as a way of keeping your mental health in a good place for these terrifying moments. But you're the first person who's mentioned preparing for feelings, and that is a huge. I don't want anyone to who listens to this to like glaze over this idea that Melissa's brought up, that you can prepare for the feelings that you're going to have in the future. So when they happen, you're ready for them. I mean, that's incredible.
You have to practice being nervous, just like you have to practice anything else. I mentioned this during the practicing workshop the other day, that I've sort of done some rock climbing throughout the years. I have an intense fear of heights. Like, it's really, really bad. The moment I am more than 6 feet off the ground, my legs just start shaking uncontrollably. And for anyone who might not know, I'm also very into acro yoga, which is partner acrobatics. And so my friends who know this about me, they're like, that makes no sense. How can you possibly be scared of heights? You do acro yoga. And for me, actually, acro has helped a lot with my anxiety and rock climbing, because it's like being in that moment when the nervous response kicks in, and then you can start to train yourself to arm yourself with the coping mechanisms, with the tools, with a weapon to fight back. Like, okay, I'm shaking. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just means that my body is responding by shaking. So what can I tap into that is within my control, so that when it's less, depending on whether or not you've got your harness on. But if you're rock climbing and you're high up, I can feel the anxiety response now. My palms are starting to get sweaty just thinking about being up on that wall. But again, it's like knowing that in that moment you can practice responding to the situation, so that when you're on stage, when in our minds there are higher stakes, there are not actually higher stakes, by the way, if you play a wrong note. Depends on the context, but in general, one wrong note, we just we act as if it's going to be a career-ending thing.
Has anyone been fired for one note?
Not to my knowledge.
Joy behind me said yes. I know that people have been fined for wrong notes. James Brown, and I have this direct from one of his guitar players, Damon Wood. Anytime he would flash the 5, that's how many dollars you're being fined on stage. That's anyway, there are some high pressure gigs where those mistakes really do count, but in most situations, I think is what you're trying to say, like, we're not going to die, we're not going to lose our job, we're not going to be fired from the band.
Right. Yeah. In general. I mean, of course there are high pressure situations, and you want to prepare for those as well. Yeah.
I did see, I did see a stage person get fired for it's all musicals. I feel like musicals are actually a very high pressure situation. Like, there was I did, for some reason, most of my musicals experience was in Salt Lake City, and I was a spotlight.
We love our musicals in Salt Lake.
On My Fair Lady, and there was one show where the background scene kind of like the stage spun around and the background scene was supposed to come down, but it wasn't, and it made the whole conversation that was happening very weird without the context. And so they realized it was wrong, and so the background starts coming down, but they were all worried and nervous, so now it's like swinging, and this background is just slowly coming down, swinging, and it comes to like a crash. Oh, no. And it was the same show that audio cues were happening at the wrong times, and there were people fired the next day.
Oh dear.
So it was,
well, I mean, there is
a full disaster.
Oh no. Yeah. There's so much money at stake.
On the line. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In musicals. I'm just going to tell this story because it's funny. I was subbing on My Fair Lady, and there's a scene in the second act, the party scene.
Yeah.
Where the orchestra is on stage. And then the band cart, after we're like playing our last notes, the band cart is receding and the turntable is still going. And the next thing comes down as the set pieces are moving and the curtain comes down in front of us. And that's like, we've played the last note, our bows are in the air, and we're supposed to wait until the curtain comes down before we put our instruments down. So one night the band cart goes back, but only halfway. We're still playing. We play our last note and we're all just like waiting for something to happen. The turntable is still going. And then we realize that the some of the actors who were also dancing, because it's like the ballroom scene, they sort of like hop off of a still moving turntable.
Yeah,
and the set pieces aren't where they're supposed to be. And so the whole thing kind of broke down. And Laura Benanti, who's a very famous Broadway actress, was starring in the production at the time. And she broke that fourth wall, and she just like started playing charades with the audience. It was kind of amazing.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Those moments.
Until everything got back up and running. Whoa. I love it. I mean, we take ourselves so seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're like singing and dancing on stage. It looks really weird with the sound off if you're watching a video.
Yeah. No doubt. You said a couple minutes ago that you felt like you were giving an acceptance speech, and I don't have any River of Suck trophies to give you, but I do have this River of Suck t-shirt that I will be mailing you.
So fun.
We'll talk later about what size you want, and anyone else who wants them, they are available at riverofsuck.com. I asked if anyone in the chat had any questions for you, and Kim said that she felt like we got a lot of answers. Probably might have a question in a year. So I think all the folks listening live are very appreciative of you opening up and sharing your experiences and your feelings. It is really hard to do this, folks. This kind of interview in front of people who are listening live. So I just want to thank you so much for being willing to do something like this and being so open with us.
Oh, Andy, you're the best. Thank you so much for the community that you've created, for the River of Suck podcast, for the swim team, for bringing all of us together. I mean, it's such an inspiring, special thing.
Yeah. So this is a very important thing that we want to make sure that we do. How do we stay in touch with you? How do we follow your music? Where do we go?
Well, my website is just my name.com, melissatong.com. I'm afraid that my website is probably horribly out of date because that's what happens to a lot of us. You can find me on Instagram at crankymellymet. And I also did start a company with the wonderful Chris Comfort, and we can be found at beneutralbodies.com. During the beginning of the great unpleasantness, I actually did 3 teacher trainings on anatomy and yoga and acro yoga, and started doing private sessions for free with anyone who had lost their jobs due to the pandemic. And so that included a lot of musicians. And I ended up realizing that there were a lot of movement patterns that certain groups of instruments have in common. So, for example, violinists and violists have a lot in common with trumpet players, and clarinetists and percussionists have a lot in common with cellists, because of the way we use our bodies when we're playing our instruments. And so I wanted to help musicians. And it's not rocket science. I mean, the body is a complicated thing, but there are a few key pieces of information where if we just learned certain things in conservatory, in high school, we could do a lot to help ourselves to prevent injury and to learn about breath work and all of that other good stuff. So you can find that at beneutralbodies.com. Also, that website is probably out of date. Apologies. I'm working on it.
So let's just make sure we have this spelled out right. It's the letter B and then neutral bodies, plural. The letter B, neutralbodies.com. And your Instagram to follow you, Cranky Melamet, is spelled CrankyMelimet. So everyone go follow Melissa over there. I want to talk to you forever because it's so fun, but we have to wrap it up. So
isn't that a Disney song? For the first time? No, never mind.
It could be a future Disney song. I don't know.
Andy's idea. Copyright it.
And we want to thank our host, our Zoom host today, Brett Kretzer, for helping us keep everyone in line. Our
Thanks,
event
Brett.
coordinator, Eric Eidreiner, is here. And the whole team at Fiddle Hell Online, including Mr. Fiddle Hell, my dad, Dave Reiner, and my mom, Cindy Ide, and the
amazing
zillions of people who came to Fiddle Hell. Thanks for being, and especially those of you who came to this special live episode of the River of Suck podcast. So here we go. Nobody ever said crossing the River of Suck would be easy or that you had to do it alone. So we want to thank you for tuning in and giving it a chance. You can join the River of Suck swim team for just $1 a month at riverofsuckswimteam.com. Get all kinds of exclusive bonus content and awesome other things. We do now have t-shirts and long sleeve t-shirts and sweatshirts available at riverofsuck.com. Till next time, keep swimming. Thanks, Melissa Tong. You were the best.
Thank you. You're the best.